White cop's frame, black man, unaware. He's a CIA agent. The truth explodes in court. They didn't ask his name. They asked for his license, his hands, his silence. On a thick Mississippi night, beneath the faded green of a street sign that once meant justice, Medgar Evers Boulevard, they pulled a black man from his truck like he was a threat, not a grandfather. No gun, no raised voice, just breathe in his lungs and skin. They never stopped fearing. The first slap of the cuffs echoed louder than the cicadas. The deputy smiled like she'd caught a killer. What she saw was a fuse. Elijah Booker didn't flinch, didn't plead. He'd seen walls fall in Berlin, lied to diplomats in 4 languages, and buried brothers in uniform under quiet flags. But nothing, not war, not betrayal, cuts colder than this, the way your own country looks at you like a stranger, a target, an inconvenience. They said he ran a stop sign. But what stopped that night wasn't his truck. It was belief, in systems, in fairness, in the illusion that doing right would shield you. They popped his tailgate, found what they planted, called it justice. But Elijah wasn't prey. He was a match in a powder keg. And this time, the fire wasn't going to wait. This isn't just a story of injustice. It's the sound of promises breaking. And the moment the quiet ones decide they're done waiting to be saved. Stay with me. This storm doesn't start with thunder. It starts with stillness. And it's already here. It began, as most southern storms do, not with lightning, but with stillness, the kind that settles in your bones before the thunder ever finds your ears. And on that night in Jackson, Mississippi, the stillness hung low over Medgar Evers Boulevard like a prayer that never made it past the lips. Elijah Booker drove with the kind of care only older men possess. His hands, worn from decades of carrying things heavier than grocery bags, secrets, service, silence, rested steadily on the wheel of his old Ford. He wasn't rushing. You don't rush when you've seen what he's seen. You don't fear the dark when you've crawled through it in foreign lands, listening to the breath of enemies on the other side of a crumbling wall. But what you do fear, what never stops rattling in your gut, is the feeling that home ain't home when the wrong person sees you at the wrong hour. It was just past 9, the air thick as boiled syrup. Porch lights flickered in tired neighborhoods. Somewhere a screen door banged shut, and somewhere else the blue lights began to flash behind Elijah's truck. He didn't panic. He pulled over slowly and precisely. He cut the engine, rolled down his window, turned on his interior light, hands at 10 and 2. This was a ritual, one he'd rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times. Not because he was guilty, but because history had made sure men like him always prepared for the worst. The deputy's boots hit the pavement like she owned it. Winona Hensley, sheriff, born into the badge, baptized in legacy. Her father had policed these streets before integration made his job more complicated. She wore his ghost, like a uniform under her own. She leaned into the window with a grin so polite it could slice flesh. "Evening, Mr. Booker. You know why we pulled you over tonight?" Elijah didn't flinch. "I imagine you're about to tell me." Behind the truck, another door slammed. Roxy McGraw, younger, colder, no need for smiles. She moved to the tailgate like she had every right in the world. Winona kept talking, something about a rolling stop, something about probable cause. Elijah kept quiet. Not because he agreed, but because men like him had learned that words, in the wrong hands, become weapons. Then came the tailgate click. The sound was subtle, but it hit Elijah like a rifle shot. He turned his head slowly, saw Roxy lifting the back of the truck, her body blocking the view. "Found something, Sheriff," she said, loud enough for the body mic that may or may not have been working. Winona nodded, stepped back, hand resting casually near her holster. "Well, would you look at that?" Elijah didn't need to see it. He knew. A small bag, unmarked, powdery white, out of place, out of time, not his, never his. Still the cuffs came, cold steel against weathered wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," Winona recited with the confidence of someone who's done this before. And Elijah did remain silent, but not because he was beaten, because he was waiting, watching, calculating. They thought they'd pulled over a man. What they'd pulled over was a fuse, and the match had just been lit. The steel bit into his wrists with the indifference of repetition. Winona Hensley had fastened cuffs on enough black men in Jackson to have forgotten most of their names by morning. Elijah Booker wouldn't be one of them. They led him through the precinct like a prop in a performance, not a man. The desk sergeant barely glanced up. A few officers chuckled in the break room. The building smelled like old coffee, bleach, and something more permanent. Power left to rot. The sheriff's station was small, the kind where everyone knew everyone and secrets traveled faster than case files. But Elijah wasn't studying floor plans or memorizing camera placements, as he had in Berlin. No, what he studied now were faces, voices, tones. He was listening for the most dangerous thing in a place like this: comfort. People here were too comfortable with the lie. Roxy McGraw walked behind him, her boots clicking on linoleum like a metronome. She was younger and quieter than Winona, but no less complicit. Elijah knew her type. Not the architect, just the willing hand. The kind of officer who said she was following orders, but never once questioned where those orders pointed. They sat him down for processing. A young man with a buzz cut and an awkward energy fumbled through the motions. He couldn't look Elijah in the eye. His name tag read P. Mathis. New, maybe, still soft in the moral places. Elijah filed that away. Soft could turn to strong or sour. It depends on who was watching. Winona leaned against the doorway with the ease of someone who believed gravity served her personally. She had that casual cruelty only Southern lawmen, or law women, in her case, seemed to perfect. The kind was passed down, not through training, but through family dinners and sideways comments that were never corrected. "You know," she drawled, "you could save us both a lot of time and say where the rest of it is. That bag in the truck didn't just float in from the sky." Elijah met her gaze, not defiant, not angry, just still. "I served in countries where men disappeared for less than that line," he said, "and even they were better at lying." Winona's smile tightened. She didn't like that. She wanted them scared. She liked them begging. But Elijah offered her nothing. He was led to the holding cell, a small room with peeling paint and the kind of overhead light that flickered just often enough to rattle your nerves. He sat on the bench with his back straight. He wasn't here to rest. He counted footsteps, the door buzzes, watched which officers walked in pairs and which ones walked alone. In the silence he heard truths. The way people didn't look at him said more than words. The way they did, some with disdain, some with unease, told him where the cracks were. They thought he was an older man who was out of his depth. But Elijah Booker had been watching systems collapse since before most of these officers were born. And he knew this one had already started to wobble. Not from outside pressure, but from the weight of its decay. He leaned back against the wall. The cuffs had left red rings around his wrists. They would fade. What mattered now was time. He had planted seeds, quiet, careful. and he was waiting for someone inside this place to start wondering if they were standing on solid ground, or something already starting to give. The break room smelled like scorched coffee and burnt pride. Deputy Roxy McGraw leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching the percolator drip like time itself was stuck in syrup. Across from her, Winona Hensley stirred sugar into her mug with the calm of a woman who'd already decided how the day would end. The two women didn't speak much in these moments. They didn't have to. The silence between them was its language, made of long nights, cover-ups, and mutual understanding. "He didn't even flinch," Roxy said finally, her voice low. "Didn't ask why, didn't plead, just watched." Winona didn't look up. "That's the worst kind," she said. "The quiet ones. They know how to wait." Roxy took a sip of bitter coffee, her lips tightening. "You think he's going to make noise?" "He can't," Winona replied, smiling faintly. "The evidence is airtight. A bag in the trunk. His prints are on the door. No witnesses. No cameras that matter." But that wasn't quite true, and something in Roxy's silence said she knew it. Across the hallway, behind a thin wall and thicker silence, Elijah sat in his cell like a monument, still unwavering, not praying and not pacing, and just existing in a way that felt dangerous, like a man who'd seen worse and come through it sharper. And down the corridor, Officer Camille Harris scrolled through the arrest report on her terminal, her brow furrowed. Something was off. The timeline was too clean. The story was too rehearsed. She'd only been on the force 11 months, but her father had taught her something before he passed. When the story's too smooth, someone's hiding the sandpaper. She looked toward the holding cells. She hadn't said a word to the man inside, but she'd seen his eyes when he was brought in. Clear, steady, like he was reading the room with the same precision she used to read fire patterns with her dad. Winona and Roxy laughed again in the break room, their voices drifting into the hallway like smoke from an old fire. Camille looked back at the report, then at the door, and for the first time since donning the badge, she wondered if she was on the wrong side of the lock. Camille didn't move for a long time. Her eyes lingered on the monitor, the arrest report open like an accusation. The language was clinical, textbook perfect, routine traffic stop. The driver exhibited nervous behavior, consent to search granted, controlled substance discovered in vehicle. It read like 100 other reports she'd been told to memorize at the academy. That was the problem. It was too perfect. No rough edges, no hesitation, no truth. She stood up quietly, making sure no one noticed. The station was half asleep, lulled by routine and the smug confidence that came with believing nothing would ever change. Winona was still in the break room, laughing about something. Roxy had disappeared, maybe to file the chain of custody, perhaps to breathe. Camille slipped into the records room, a place officers rarely visited unless they had something to hide, or something to find. She logged into the terminal and pulled the footage from the garage cam. It was a long shot. Most of the cameras hadn't worked properly in months, and even the functioning ones were often misfiled. But the archive hadn't been scrubbed yet, not all of it. She searched by timestamp. Her fingers trembled when the video finally loaded. There it was. Winona and Roxy were standing behind the Ford. Elijah wasn't in the frame yet, but Winona popped the tailgate open herself, before any conversation, before any alleged consent. Roxy handed her something, unlabeled, palmed, a bag. It vanished into the bed of the truck like a magician's trick. No drama, no urgency, just practice. Camille stared at the screen, her breath caught between anger and disbelief. She replayed the moment again and again, hoping, maybe, for a different angle, a mistake in perception. But the truth was right there, quiet and visible. She copied the footage onto a flash drive, tucked it inside her inner jacket pocket, and logged out. As she stepped into the hallway, the buzz of the fluorescent lights suddenly felt louder and harsher. She passed by Elijah's cell. He didn't look up, didn't speak. But something in him shifted. He felt it, like the weather changing. She walked past him without a word, but her steps were different now. There was weight in them, intention. And for the first time since Elijah had entered that station, the air began to shift. The station was quieter than it had any right to be. Not the good kind of calm, the peaceful kind, but the heavy, waiting kind, the kind that comes just before a verdict or a storm. Camille sat at her desk, the flash drive burning a hole in her coat pocket. She hadn't told anyone, not yet, but her silence was a weight, and it was starting to press on her chest. Across the bullpen, the usual morning chatter had started up. Officers sipped bad coffee, joked about meaningless things, and filed paperwork with half an eye open. No one noticed the shift. Not yet. But Camille did. She noticed the way her fingers wouldn't stop drumming on the desk. She saw the way her heart beat faster every time Roxy walked by. Guilt has a way of making everything louder. Elijah remained in his cell, still and unreadable. Camille glanced at him through the hallway window. His presence unnerved her, not because he was dangerous, but because he wasn't. There was no fear in him, no confusion, only patience. And that, somehow, was worse. He knew. Somehow he knew everything. She looked around the room. She could hear Winona in the back office, probably preparing the statement. The same old lines: community safety, resisting arrest, criminal intent. Camille knew what that press release would look like before it was even typed. She'd read versions of it her whole life. Her father used to say, "Justice doesn't start when a crime ends. It starts when someone says, 'This isn't right,' loud enough for someone else to listen." She hadn't said it out loud yet, but she was getting close. She pulled up the department's secure communication portal. It was slow, outdated, the kind of system no one used unless they had to. She attached the footage, fingers hovering over the send button. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she pressed it. The screen blinked. Sent. She exhaled, slow and full. The weight shifted just a little. Not gone, but lighter. Behind her, Elijah sat up straighter, like something invisible had cracked. Just a hairline fracture. But enough. Camille didn't know what would happen next, but she knew the lie wasn't sealed anymore. And sometimes, that's where justice begins. It started with a silence that didn't belong, the kind that made the hair on the back of Elijah's neck rise. Not from fear, but from recognition. He'd heard it before in foreign places with foreign tongues, just before things shifted. The quiet before a transmission landed, before orders changed, before everything began to move. In his cell, the air felt different, the kind of stillness that hummed. He didn't lift his head, not yet. But he knew. Somewhere out there, a signal had reached the right ears. Camille sat back in her chair, her palms still damp. She kept her face neutral, fingers poised above a keyboard she no longer needed. The footage had gone out, up the chain, past the state, past the walls of that building, and landed where it was supposed to. Somewhere cold, professional, and federal. The shift began quietly. A dispatch call came in, coded and clipped. A few officers glanced up, confused at first, then returned to their routines. But Camille watched the clock. She counted heartbeats. 15 minutes, maybe 20. That's how long it would take, if they were coming, and they were coming. Elijah finally looked up. Through the narrow slit of the cell door window, he saw movement on the monitors. Unmarked vehicles are pulling into the lot. Black sedans. Suits are stepping out, calm, clean, prepared. They didn't enter loudly. They didn't shout or flash guns. They moved with intention. Federal agents don't need to prove they belong. Their presence alone rewrites the rules. One of them, tall, older, with a weathered calm that Elijah recognized instantly, stepped through the front entrance. Camille caught his eye. No nods, no smiles, just a purpose. The desk sergeant blinked, unsure whether to stand or speak. But by then, it didn't matter. The man held up his credentials. "Federal investigation," he said. "We need access to your holding cells, records, and every officer currently on duty. No drama, no build-up, just the facts, dropped like a weight on the floor." In his cell, Elijah closed his eyes for just a second. Not to rest, but to steady himself. The air had shifted. The storm he'd been waiting for had finally touched ground. The door buzzed, and the bolt slid back with a dull, mechanical clunk. Elijah opened his eyes. He didn't move right away. After all these years, he'd learned not to greet change with eagerness. Let it come. Let it reveal itself first. The agent stepped into the cell block, a man in his 50s with gray at his temples and the kind of calm that only comes from having seen too much and survived it all. He didn't smile. He didn't offer an apology. But there was respect in the way he looked at Elijah, and that alone was enough. "Elijah Booker?" he asked. Elijah nodded. "You're free to go." The words were simple, but they echoed in the air like something more. Not mercy, no permission, just a correction, a wrong, interrupted before it could become permanent. Elijah stood, slow and steady, his back straight, his eyes level. The agent stepped aside to let him pass, a gesture not of superiority, but of acknowledgement. Elijah walked out of the cell without a word, the same way he'd walked into foreign buildings overseas, measured, aware, watching every inch of the world around him. In the station, the shift was unmistakable. Officers stopped mid-sentence. Phones stopped ringing. Even the air felt tighter. The federal agents had fanned out, speaking softly into earpieces, moving through files, terminals, records, turning over stones no one ever expected to be lifted. Camille stood at her desk, her heart somewhere between her throat and her heels. She watched as Elijah passed, and for the first time, their eyes met. No one said anything. They didn't need to. In that glance, everything passed between them. Truth, risk, resolve. She had made the call. He had held the line, and now the system was cracking. Elijah reached the front doors and paused. The morning sun had just broken across the pavement, casting long golden shadows through the station's glass. He stepped outside. No victory speech, no raised fist, just a man walking free, because someone inside chose not to stay quiet. And in that, there was more power than any badge in the building could understand. Inside the bullpen, the mood shifted from routine to unease, as if the room was remembering it had something to hide. Agents moved through the station with quiet authority, collecting files and opening drawers that no one thought would ever be opened. The sound of printers pausing mid-run, of papers being lifted from stacks long ignored, it all built into a silent reckoning. Winona Hensley stood by her office door, arms crossed, eyes sharp but unsure. Her smile, the one she wore like a shield, had vanished. She watched the agents move and knew enough not to ask questions. It was too late for questions. What was coming didn't need her permission. Roxy McGraw appeared beside her, face pale beneath the hard lines. She glanced around, as if trying to gauge how fast the walls were closing in. "This is about Booker," she said, almost a whisper. Winona didn't answer, but the silence between them confirmed it. From across the room, the lead agent approached, his badge held with the steady weight of certainty. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Sheriff Hensley, Deputy McGraw, we need you both to come with us." Winona squared her shoulders, but there was no bravado left, just a slow acceptance. Roxy hesitated, then fell in behind her. As they were escorted out, the room didn't speak. No one defended them. No one protested. And that silence, that sharp, watching silence, cut deeper than any accusation. Camille stood still, her heart thudding like a drum muffled beneath her uniform. She saw them pass, saw the faces she'd once trusted, now stripped of their confidence, their certainty. She didn't look away. She didn't smile. But her hands had stopped, shaking. Elijah, already outside in the open air, stood just beyond the steps, the wind tugging gently at his coat. He didn't watch the door, didn't wait for a scene. But when the two women emerged, flanked by agents, led past their building like trespassers in a place they once ruled, looked. And what he saw was not revenge. It was the truth, finally visible in daylight. Justice didn't arrive like a thunderclap that day. It came like the turning of a key in a lock that had stayed shut for far too long. The hallway outside the interrogation rooms was quiet, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. This one carried weight, the kind that bends floors and presses on lungs. Inside the room, Winona sat stiff in a metal chair, her badge lying flat on the table beside her like a discarded story. Roxy sat across from her, eyes down, fingers twitching against her thigh. No one spoke. Agent Marlon Diaz entered, file in hand, sleeves rolled back, just enough to suggest this wasn't his first time facing a wall built on lies. He placed the folder gently on the table and opened it with precision, not drama. He didn't raise his voice. Men like him knew that truth didn't need volume, just light. "This is your report," he said, tapping the top page. "Filed at 9:52 p.m., claims consent was given, claims the bag was discovered during a lawful search." Neither woman spoke. "Not yet." Diaz slid a photo across the table, a still frame from the station's security camera. Winona is in the garage, tailgate open, no Booker in sight. A shadow, Roxy's, off to the side, handing something off. He waited. "That doesn't mean anything," Winona said finally, her voice brittle. "We were prepping the scene. You were planting evidence," Diaz said, still calm. "And the system you thought would protect you? It just gave us the key to unlock all of this." Roxy's mouth opened, then closed. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her shoulders dropped an inch. That was all it took. "We didn't mean to ruin him," she said, barely audible. "It wasn't supposed to go that far." Diaz didn't blink, but it did. The silence that followed was complete, with things neither of them could take back. Outside the room, Camille watched the security monitor. She saw Winona's jaw tighten, saw Roxy crumble, and she knew the truth had cracked open. Not enough to fix everything, not yet, but enough to stop the lie from growing. Justice had entered through a side door. No fanfare, just evidence, resolve, and someone brave enough to say, "This isn't right," and sometimes that's all it takes. The late afternoon sun spilled across the station's front steps, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward something beyond the parking lot, beyond Jackson itself. Elijah Booker stood just past the threshold, not in a hurry to leave, not waiting for applause. He stood like a man who had weathered something old and familiar, and once again outlasted it. He hadn't spoken much since walking free. The agents offered him a ride. He declined, offered him a statement. He refused. Elijah didn't need to explain. Not to them. Not to anyone. The truth had spoken in complete sentences already, through footage, through silence, through the cracks in the voices of those who thought their power permanent. Camille stepped out a moment later, hesitant at first. She had removed her badge and placed it in her desk drawer with care. It wasn't shame that made her pause. It was the weight of everything that had happened in so little time. She didn't want to feel proud. She wanted to feel sure. Elijah turned as she approached, nodding once, the kind of gesture that meant more than any thank you. "You okay?" she asked, voice quiet, like they were still inside. He looked out toward the tree line, where the wind moved through leaves like water through reeds. "I've been worse," he said. They stood there for a while, side by side, two people from different decades, different battles, but for a brief moment, anchored by the same ground. Camille wanted to say something else, something about courage or change or how hard it had been to press that button, but Elijah spared her. "You did what you could," he said. "That's more than most." She nodded, eyes stinging in a way she hadn't expected. Not sadness, not relief. Something deeper, something earned. He started to walk then, not toward a car, not toward a finish line, just forward as if that was enough, as if moving on was its kind of victory. Camille watched him go, the sun at his back, and knew that while the fight wasn't over, something had shifted. And for now, that was enough. The story didn't end when Elijah walked away. Not really. Stories like his never do. They settle, they ripple, they return in whispers and headlines and changed hearts. Inside the station, the air had shifted, but the structure remained. Files still lined the walls. Phones still rang. But something had cracked, something you couldn't tape back together. Camille sat alone in the locker room, the buzz of the overhead lights steady now, no longer flickering. Her uniform hung behind her, untouched. She stared at the floor, elbows on her knees, fingers clasped. She hadn't quit, not yet, but she hadn't put the badge back on either. Outside, the parking lot shimmered with late sunlight. Elijah was gone now. No parade, no statement, no vindication speech for the cameras. Just gone, like the kind of man who never needed to be seen to leave a mark. But she could feel him still, like gravity, like legacy. News had started to leak. Internal affairs, federal statements, journalists circling, officers whispering. Some avoided her eyes. Others gave her a nod in passing. A quiet salute, maybe. Maybe just a line drawn, and deep in the heart of the building, the walls held their breath. The system had swallowed too many stories like Elijah's. But this one didn't vanish. This one lingered. In the far interrogation room, Winona sat silent. Her badge had been boxed, her title stripped, but her eyes hadn't changed. She still believed she knew how the world worked. That belief was her shield. It had always been. Roxy wasn't beside her this time. She'd broken somewhere in the middle, between truth and loyalty, between what she thought was duty and what she now knew was damage. Justice hadn't roared in this place. It didn't wear a cape or raise its fist. It whispered, in files opened, in the videos sent, in the quiet tremble of a young officer doing the one thing everyone told her not to do, stand still when it was easier to turn away. And outside, beneath the fading light of a Mississippi evening, truth stood tall, not because it won, but because someone refused to let it die. That, sometimes, is the victory. That sometimes is enough. Some stories don't need to shout to be heard. The quiet fire of Elijah Booker is one of them. It's a story about silence that speaks louder than sirens, about a man who refused to bow, and a young woman who chose to rise. It's about the power of standing still when everyone else is moving in the wrong direction. Elijah didn't resist with fists or fire. He resisted with presence, with truth, with the unshakable stillness of a man who has nothing to prove but everything to protect. Camille didn't come charging in with certainty. She came with questions, with doubt, with courage that grew in quiet. And somehow that was enough to tip the scales of justice. If you were in Elijah's shoes, would you have stayed calm? If you were Camille, would you have pressed send? And if you were just a witness to it all, what would your silence mean? This story isn't just fiction. It's a mirror. It asks where you stand when right and wrong stop being abstract. And that's why I'd love to hear from you. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something you weren't expecting, remember to like and subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter. Drop a comment below. Tell me who you saw yourself in, or what it made you think about. Your voice means more than you know. It keeps stories like this alive. Thank you for listening.